It can take longer if you want, but I'm Good evening, friends, and thank you for coming. Today is Friday, November the 14th. Am I right? Yes, thank God I got the day in right. Many things are happening around, and we know that this has been very intense this past 1 week. Welcome to the Third World Network side event, which is focusing on the expectations for COP30, and particularly from the perspective of developing countries. Now, we have got very key developing country negotiators with us. They are actually very busy right now because the negotiations are going on and are likely to go on till late tonight. So they're working really very hard. But because this event is important to spread their perspectives about they want to give insights as to what is actually happening. So they were very kind to accept the invitation of the Third World Network to be here. And I see quite a number of familiar faces. You're probably wondering what's going on. There have been a lot of actions out there. It's very critical to actually get the perspective of what's happening in the inside. Are we making progress? And so many of us come to this COP year after year, and we are really wondering whether we are making any inroads. And I think particularly from the perspective of the developing countries in the global south, we in Third World Network publish all these updates every day. So for those of you who want to get access to what goes on inside the halls, we would urge you to pick up the QR code from here and get access to these news. Now, we know that multilateralism is in the balance because you have the 10th anniversary of the Paris Agreement, and the convention is 30 years old, and the Kyoto Protocol is a little younger than the convention. But what is it really being delivered? So we have an excellent lineup of speakers, some who will actually turn up as we speak because of the negotiations. So we have, first of all, we have the key subjects of just transition. Many of you are keenly following this, particularly from civil society. I will introduce the speakers as I invite them to speak so you know who they are afterwards. So we are very pleased to have with us Khaled Hashem from Egypt, who is actually coordinating the G77 and China. Not a very easy task to do. And he is leading us on the Just Transition Work Program. What do you see? What are your expectations? What are your insights? Do you see any progress? We are in week 1. Do you see anything happening in this week? And do you have any hope for next week?
Thank you very much, Meena, for this introduction. I hope that I'm heard well. So let me start by the Just Transition Work Program. And can you hear me? Yes. Okay. So thank you very much, Meena, for this introduction, and really happy and glad to be at the event by the TWN today. And as Meena said, we are towards the end of the first week of the negotiations, and this is usually when we get, as negotiators, hammered by a lot of texts, last-minute texts that we have to revise and we have to reflect on very short notice before everything goes out of the hands of the negotiators and get elevated to the political level for the next week. So this is the same case for the Just Transition Work Program. We just received the first iteration of a text today that parties are still reflecting on. But most importantly, I mean, the G77 and China and its coordination, and I might differ with regard to how hard it is, because it might not be as hard when it comes to the developing countries, as we have a lot of commonalities with regard to just transition and how we look into just transition with that regard. That brought us this session very united in one major request and proposal. And I'm pretty much sure that you're aware of this, as it was also shared by many of the civil society and the trade unions, and it is the mechanism, the just transition mechanism. So we were able in this session to come forward with one unified proposal by the G77, requesting the parties to establish a just transition mechanism that would enable the countries to pursue their ambition directly linked to the implementation and the means of implementation in the context of international cooperation and the enabling environment that is necessary for the just transition pathways to happen. So we're pretty much optimistic as developing countries that our voice will be heard with the support of many of the civil societies, and we look forward to have this mechanism being established and in process. So what will it do to our process, and how will a mechanism really assist in the, as Meena has provided us in her introductory remarks, that multilateralism is at balance this year, and we need really to see the checks there that are being provided on the multilateralism. And I really agree with her with that regard, that this COP is exceptional in that sense, because with all what's going on even outside of the UNFCCC process, with all the geopolitical challenges and with all the challenge that the world that is facing with regard to the multilateral work and how collectively we're bringing our objectives for the humanity and our common future as human beings, the Just Transition Work Program was pushed and designed from this point of view, because at a certain point we've seen that this process is delivering on the ambition, yet we understand that there are some gaps in the ambition at the end. And this year, it's the first year of the NDCs that is being informed by the first GST. And we know that to catalyze and make parties provide their ambition in a safe way and in a convenient way that is directly related to the implementation, that would require these parties to see actually their NDCs being implemented. So the Just Transition Work Program and the mechanism can provide this kind of opportunity in linking the ambition to the real implementation on the ground, being based on the necessary means of implementation, and in light of the international cooperation that is also necessary. So if you take for an example, like many of our developing countries have provided their NDC 2.0. And according to the first GST cycle, where the gaps in the implementation and also the gaps in the ambition were identified, they were requested to design their NDC 3.0, being informed and being one step further towards the more ambitious cycle of NDCs. But yet what we have seen as a gap also is the implementation itself, like how much of NDC 2.2 is being implemented and what are the challenges and how these challenges can be brought forward so that even the more ambitious NDCs we have a guarantees for them to be implemented. So all this kind of discussion was brought forward under the many dialogues that we had under the Just Transition Work Program. And we thought that this is the time that we harness all this kind of discussion, the development priorities also of the countries, and how we can link climate action to development as well. Not prioritizing one over the other, but rather to synchronize the pathways together, whether on the climate action and the ambition and the pursuing low emission economies, yet also more resilient economies that would be feasible. So all this discussion that happened under the dialogues, we had 4 dialogues so far. It did actually expand our perspective towards the just transition, and it was a kind of a learning experience to most of the countries by the experience that was shared and the best practices and how the transition can happen while also leaving no one behind, putting all the social perspective, the economic perspective into the equation and trying to come up with a kind of a balance and have that into an implementation plan on a national level. And we learned a lot, I will have to say, by the experiences shared by the developed countries with that regard, when it comes to their own just transition platforms or just transition mechanisms. And we've seen that there are plenty of good examples that we can create this kind of mechanism that will have a platform within that countries can share their experiences and try to provide implementable solutions on how to drive and accelerate ambition, yet how to realize this ambition in an implementable way on the ground as well. I'll stop here. I hope that I provided some insights with regard to that, and I'll give back to you, Meena.
Thank you, Khaled, very much. I know you have to go soon, but I will entertain maybe 1 or 2 questions and before we let you go. Any burning questions from anyone for Khaled? Yes, please. And please identify yourself. Mic to... Just speak into it. I think they'll...
Okay, now it's working. Thank you so much, Ambassador Khaled. This is Hajar. I follow Just Transition with Women and Gender Constituency. And we, like, I also highlight the thing that Khaled just wrote about the unification of global South country. I've been following negotiations in general in UNFCCC for, this is like 4th COP, and this is one of the moments I personally really appreciate about this unification. But also, I personally have 2 questions. First, about like we have witnessed today like lots of.
speed up your question.
Okay, sorry. For the just transition mechanism, there's the things that some parties are bringing around the action plan, not coordination, and this is also like as I personally perceive it, a dilution of the mechanism. So how are like your tactics to push on that? And the other thing, the disagreement that we usually see, especially yesterday and today around the CBAM. That's it. Thank you.
I think 2 questions in one. So Khaled, over to you.
Well, thank you. I mean, they're very important questions, but also very recent as well. So when it comes to the action plan that was proposed in session only like less than 2 hours ago, this was our first time that we hear it from our the partners that came from the EU, and still I don't have it. I mean, on written from we requested from our partners to provide us with this, but I grasped from the session while hearing the objectives and some of the features and I've seen a lot of like resemblance also to the mechanism that we had proposed, but yet that would require some time to assess and properly engage with our partners with that regard, and we see like how much we can carry forward together for the institutional arrangements. But it's positive development from my point of view that the other side is hearing our voice. They are trying to engage accordingly and providing some constructive proposal with that regard, and we hope that would be a good initial step. And it also demonstrates like how strong when developing countries provide their point of views and their perspective, that would also encourage our partners to engage constructively in the negotiations. So this is something that we will have to build a position on according to the proposal that will be presented comprehensively. And on the CBAM, it's not an issue that is being addressed only under the just transition, as you all know. It was brought forward under the just transition according to the agenda agreement that we had at SB 62. Yet it is a very, very, very important issue for a lot of developing countries. And we are not talking about a specific group of party CBAM or a specific party. It's concerning to the developing countries since it's becoming a kind of a global north trend, which from our point of view, we see that it does contradict fundamentally with the principles of the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement when it comes to the CBDRC, the equity, all the fundamental principles, also the nationally determined nature of the climate action in general, including the emission reduction that is based on CBDRC and equity as well. So it is something that we see that it's fundamentally, I would say, playing with the structure that we have in hand, that we all agreed on under the Paris Agreement, trying to impose some kind of action from a top-down approach, but rather than a bottom-up. So it is something that we really oppose, and we don't want to expand beyond what we have, and we want to even try to find with our partners and the countries that are applying this mechanism a way forward to alleviate or avoid the negative impacts that these kind of measures would create on the developing countries.
Thank you, Khaled, and good luck to you very much. And I think you have to go to your meetings, and thank you so very much. And civil society is behind you, as you know. They are very watching this with bated breath, and we look forward to a very good outcome. Next to speak is Dr. Tejal Kanitkar, who is actually a professor in India. She's been a real expert in terms of looking at the carbon budget, the mitigation aspect of emission reductions. She has been in the IPCC also, looking at equity scenarios. So she's very well positioned to speak on the subject of what everybody is concerned about. We are going into a temperature of almost, we're already at the 1.4 temperature rise. And then the NDC synthesis, which is we all expected, the nationally determined contributions, which are showing that parties are not on track. So we have invited Tejal to actually give the perspective when we say, how do you stay within the 1.5? And when you say parties are not on track, who is really responsible for doing the right thing? And everybody is talking about NDCs being aligned to 1.5. The 1.5 is a global goal. how can you therefore expect everyone to do the same thing with historical responsibility? So, Tejal.
Thank you, Meena, and it's always a pleasure to be here on the TWN platform. And me say at the outset that I'm speaking as a professor from India and not as a negotiator for India, because then that gives me more freedom to speak about things the way in which I want to speak about them. So let me start off from where Khaled left off before I go to the 1.5 alignment issue, and that's linked to, it's been discussed in most rooms, but on unilateral measures. And I wanted to start off with, given the fact that we're in Brazil, what was so unique about the convention, about the UNFCCC? And given that it's so remarkable, also given the time that it came at a time when the world was seeing structural adjustment programs, globalization, liberalization, privatization. You had all kinds of things going on, and you had agreements that did not recognize the concept of equity. You had agreements that did not recognize that countries have different starting points. And yet here you have a remarkable document that actually recognizes the fact that not everybody is the same, that countries have different priorities. They're not starting at the same time. There's a history behind why countries are more or less developed. And how you go about taking climate action would depend on that history. It's not devoid of context. And that is something that is remarkable about the convention in so many ways. And when we are asked to focus on forward-looking elements, and this was what was celebrated when the Paris Agreement was signed. Finally, we have something that's forward-looking, that's going to be looking to the future. We have developed countries refusing to discuss pre-2020 ambition. We have developed countries talking about, what is going to happen now from 30 years from now, 40 years from now, refusing to discuss what has not happened in the past 30 years. Right? So all of this is not really in keeping with the principles that we agreed to in the convention. The fact that history does matter, where we are in terms of development does matter. It matters in terms of what we can do, what we need to do, and what our priorities are. And I think that is the architecture. It's not just the Paris Agreement, but Paris Agreement is, of course, it is born out of the convention in many ways, and it borrows the principles also of the convention. But why is it that we fight so hard to preserve that architecture of the convention so much? Is that it recognizes this. And unilateral measures, CBAM, is basically a violation of these basic principles. Yeah, the carbon border adjustment mechanism. Basically, you have developed countries who at one point of time advocated free, open markets, open economic systems, are now saying basically that we will have border adjustments, which would mean that we will not import certain goods unless they are produced in certain ways and unless they're produced in low emissions ways, etc., etc. And their argument is that this is not discriminatory, because we are imposing the same standards on our countries and in our countries and on our companies. And so we will impose them on your countries and your companies. But what they don't, it's not as if they don't realize it, what they don't tell you or what they don't say is, of course, their companies and their industries are not at the same level as industries and companies or public sector or private sector for that matter in many developing countries. So there is no level playing field. There is no competitive advantage that developing countries get. And the fact that this recognition that we have under the convention of different starting points is completely violated when you erase that. We erase that recognition, erase that idea that there is a difference between how you can manufacture steel, for example, in developing countries versus how you can manufacture steel in developed countries. How you can build infrastructure in developed countries versus developing countries. So It's a violation of the basic principles of the convention, and that is why there is such a major issue with CBAM. Of course, it has multiple impacts. It's not just the architect, the fact that it violates the principles of the convention and the Paris Agreement, but the fact that it has real impacts and tangible impacts on people. That's also an issue, but Khaled has already spoken about it, so I won't go into it. But let me then come to this entire issue of alignment with 1.5 degrees Celsius. And this is, of course, the architecture of the Paris Agreement says that we need to limit warming to a certain temperature target, well below 2 degrees Celsius, in fact, pursue efforts to limit it to 1.5 degrees Celsius. But then what does the architecture say about how we do this? We all say how much we are going to do to be able to limit warming to that particular temperature target. It's actually not linked to warming so much. How much is it that we are going to contribute to global mitigation efforts? That is what we are supposed to do through our NDCs. And collectively, this is supposed to ensure that we meet 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, it's like saying that I'll bring in a cake into this room, and that's the only cake, that's the last cake left in the world, and I'll ask all of you to say how much cake you want. So how much cake each of us wants is very likely going to exceed the size of the cake itself. But then what we are supposed to do is when we get through, let's say, some of the cake, we take stock. And we take stock and say, okay, no, now only so much of the cake is left. So now you have to reduce your expectations of how much cake you're going to get. So how much less are you willing to eat? And then you go on to, it goes on sort of every few years, and you do this until, of course, the cake is exhausted, or you realize that you in fact need more cake. So whether or not a global target is compatible with this kind of voluntary commitments is in itself something that we need to think about. But we agreed, and Paris Agreement is a agreed document, and it might represent a compromise from many parties. In many ways, it does, but it nevertheless represents a step forward in our. We have to, of course, do things based on what all of us agree to do. We cannot have individual countries saying, I don't agree with the principles, or I don't agree with. Of course, we do have individual countries who say that now, but it doesn't work if we don't have multilateralism. And while this process might be slow, might be tiresome, might be frustrating, might be a whole lot of things, the world will not be a better place without the process. We would have been in a much more difficult situation without the process. So we have to work with the process that we have, and we try to strengthen it in different ways. But this very idea of individual NDCs being aligned with 1.5 degrees Celsius, it does not make sense till you say that there has to be some metric that tells you how is it that a national target aligns with something that is a global target. So if globally you need to do some X amounts of mitigation to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, then how is that mitigation to be divided across countries in a fair and equitable manner so that everybody gets enough cake? Going back to the cake analogy, right? So those who have never eaten cake before get priority in terms of how much cake they need to, they will be given. Those who have eaten all the cake in the world before get no more cake anymore. So you need a metric to be able to determine how you compare national NDCs, national contributions to a global target. And based on the principles of the Convention and the Paris Agreement, that metric is equity and CBDRRs. So individual countries saying we have now aligned our NDC to 1.5 degrees Celsius without telling you what that means really makes no sense. And asking countries to, so on the one hand, you have developed country parties basically saying that we don't agree with the concepts of equity and CBDRRC. On the other hand, they say that we want you to align with 1.5 degrees Celsius. So then what is it that you use as a metric, if not equity and CBDRC? You use the best available science. And what is the best available science according to them? It's the IPCC. And what does the IPCC say about how is it that you meet the 1.5 degrees Celsius targets? It says that you meet it by burdening developing countries. The IPCC scenarios put the highest burden of mitigation on Africa, on a continent that has contributed nothing to the warming that we see so far. Right? So that is what the IPCC says. And this is what we very unqualifiedly call the best available science. So they say that you put, so there is no energy that Africa gets. There is no more energy that South Asia gets. All our forests are supposed to be used for as carbon sinks. Okay, so the highest mitigation burden in IPCC scenarios is not on North America. It's not on Europe. It is not on the Pacific OECD. It's on Africa. The second highest burden is on Latin America. The third highest burden is on South Asia. Okay. And somewhere, I mean, Europe and Pacific OECD and North America are somewhere at the bottom. They're allowed a smooth transition to net zero way into 2050 and sometimes even beyond 2050. So if we are to align our NDCs to these kinds of scenarios of the IPCC, that alignment will also violate the principles of the Paris Agreement, the principles of the Convention. Right? So while a lot of our NDCs, India, for example, has a long-term, low-carbon, low emissions development strategy in which it very clearly talks about how its NDC, how its long-term targets is in keeping with its fair share of the mitigation burden. It talks about the metrics of what fairness is. How many developed country NDCs do it? It's not just enough to say, I'm aligned. Aligned based on what principles? Aligned based on what metrics? So I think these questions are necessary in a lot of rooms, both in terms of parties as well as non-party stakeholders. I think the discussions are extremely siloed because what we see is some parties reacting to specific things, right? And there's always been, for example, in the mitigation work program, many people have wondered why is it that some parties don't want to see messages coming from the dialogues. In this particular COP, it might become clearer, perhaps, to non-party stakeholders, to civil society, what the problem is, because one of the topics of the dialogues was forests, right? What are the messages that developed countries want on forests? These messages on how forests are carbon sinks, how forests are necessary for mitigation, how carbon markets can provide, enhanced mitigation in forests. So, are these messages all right? Even if they are coming out of dialogues, are they applicable everywhere for everybody equitably? What about impacts? Are forests not going to be impacted by climate change? So all of these are important questions, but when you cherry pick messages, caveats get lost. And everybody talks about science, how we need science, how we need robust science and good science communication. But in a lot of the rooms, the discussions on these are extremely superficial. We are not willing to engage with qualifiers. We are not willing to engage with nuance. We are not willing to engage with balance. Everybody wants messaging. Everybody wants high-level political messages. Everybody wants strong messages, but there has to be a balance, especially when it comes to science, especially when it comes to conveying science accurately. It cannot simply be cherry-picking one aspect of it and ignoring another aspect of it. And this is there is enough there to establish clearly that climate change is real, anthropogenic global warming, it is anthropogenic, that it is human-caused global warming. And we are all, the parties who are here in this venue, are all at the table discussing it because we do believe that it is real and it is a problem. The problem of denial lies elsewhere. So I'll stop here. I've made a lot of comments on a lot of things, but I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tejal. I think your cake analogy really explains very simply what the challenge is. And then if you look at in the rooms, and I'm sure Chandni, Raina from India will also expand on that in the presidency consultations. But just to say that if we do not understand that there is a limited carbon budget within the temperature goal, and actually many developing countries fought as we move towards Paris to actually have a top-down way of what is the amount of carbon budget, how do you do fair shares, how do we distribute, and how do you do it equitably. You had the United States said, no way we can allow this. They did not want any differentiation between developed and developing country. They did not want to recognize historical responsibility. They wanted to even delete the convention, and they are still doing this. Not the US, but others are doing it in this hall where they do not want any reference to the convention at all. So you can see who is for ambition and who is actually trying to wreck this process. So it gives me, maybe before I turn over to Chandni, any one burning question to her before she leaves the room, because she also has to rush for negotiations. Anybody dying to raise? Don't be shy. If not, no, none. They all of you understand. Oh yes, okay. Please identify yourself.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kanitkar. It's a very excellent insights from you. So my name is Harry. I'm from Institute for International Trade, based in Australia, Adelaide, Australia. But I'm originally from Indonesia. So it's very passionate and very associated with my background as well. But I just want to probably how to move forward, and there is already like a proposal from Brazilian presidency with the Open Coalition. So the Integrated Forum of Climate Change and Trade. Do you see this is a pathway to find a middle ground between climate and trade, or how do you see it? Because I know there are already 10 countries that are endorsing this initiative. So and it's probably the way I see it, it's between UNFCCC and WTO. So is this probably a pathway to middle ground, as a middle ground, or yeah, how do you see it? Thank you.
I think it is for countries to decide whether they endorse initiatives outside the process or not. But the initiatives outside the process don't mean that you don't fight for issues inside the process. And that has always been, it's not as if, for example, we don't discuss issues of methane inside the process just because you have a global methane pledge. It is not as if you don't discuss, some of the other issues just because you have a pledge and platforms outside. So the nature of the platform, etc., all of that I think is yet to be clear. So we can, that will proceed. But one of the things why we think it is important to discuss this within the UNFCCC process is because it weakens the UNFCCC process. It's not about whether it bridges the things that are being discussed into different issues. We don't want to discuss details of trade here. But the fact that particular trade practices violate the principles that we have agreed to 33 years ago and reaffirmed 10 years ago. And at a time when you actually need to strengthen the global climate regime, you cannot have measures that weaken it further. So that is the reason why a lot of countries are pushing to discuss this within the process of the UNFCCC, because there is direct relevance. Now, whether there is a discussion outside the process is a landing zone or not is, I think, a question that is far above my pay grade in terms of what countries decide. But that is, my response would be limited to this.
In multilateral system, you do need to have global rules and accountability, and you can't do that with just initiatives which are outside. We can talk more about that, but at this point in time, I'd like to give the floor to Chandni, Dr. Chandni? Chandni. Thank you so much, Tejal. Chandni, Raina, for those of you who would have seen last year at COP29 in Baku on the new collective quantified goal on finance, you saw her on all the television news being beamed around the world, where she was really, she reflected a lot of the voice of developing countries when the Baku decision was adopted on the new quantified finance goal as being a joke. You didn't say a joke, but many people called it a joke. But we are very happy to have you here, and kindly give us your insights of what's been going on.
Thank you so much, Meena, for inviting me. So at present, there are these discussions ongoing under the ministerial, under the presidency consultations on 4 issues that those were proposed as new agenda items for the COP and CMA. The first that came from the like-minded countries was a proposal on implementation of Article 9.1. Article 9.1 of the Paris Agreement talks about the fact that mandates developed countries to provide resources, finances to developing countries, and this commitment is in continuation of their existing obligations under the convention. And the second subject that was brought up by the like-minded was about the unilateral trade measures, which is the similar, for instance, carbon border adjustment mechanism is a unilateral trade measure. And this unilateral trade measures, it has been put down in the paper as being inimical to development goals of countries, and it is against the spirit of multilateralism, considering that these are imposed by countries and imposing standards that are prevalent in their own countries to products coming in from other countries. And these standards relate to carbon emissions. And since the most developing countries lack the technology or have not been really responsible for historical emissions, the view has been that this is against the common but differentiated responsibility that we have agreed to as part of the overall framework of the climate multilateral agreements. The third is on the NDCs, and this was brought by the small island states. It says that the NDCs need to be implemented, and there is an implementation gap. And so there needs to be a synthesis of the NDCs, and that was the other agenda item. The fourth was on the biennial transparency reports, a review or a synthesis also of the biennial transparency reports that are now mandated, and about 37 countries have so far submitted. So more and more countries now submitting, but yes, it is still a process that has just been initiated with most countries required to submit for 2025. So when the issues came up, the presidency in the initial days, even prior to the commencement of the COP and CMA process, started with about 2 days before that, there were parleys and discussions on how to address these 4 issues. And of course, I would say, it was arrived as a consensus to move ahead through a presidency consultation. Now, if it had turned into an agenda item or an acceptance, and this happened because there was lack of acceptance of the developed countries to take 9.1 up, and there was also a lack of acceptance of the developed countries again to accept to discuss the unilateral trade measures as well. With respect to the NDCs, the view that was held by the developing countries and like-minded developing countries also was the fact that NDCs are a regular, NDC synthesis is an annual phenomenon. And it comes out as a report annually. So when it does come out, it's a report prepared by the Secretariat. It comes out annually. It is an annual affair, and this is already a part of the discussion in terms of the implementation of the Paris Agreement. So we thought that this was not something that needed to be brought into as a new agenda item because there is space for discussion. Similarly, on the biennial transparency reports as well, there is a space for discussion because those are mandated from within the Paris Agreement as a requirement for countries to provide. But the other two issues, although mandated legally, one under the Paris Agreement, which is 9.1, and the other under the Convention, Article 3.5, have not been discussed at all. And we are facing this issue of need to enhance climate ambitions, address our enormous adaptation requirements, and without finance at a cost that we can sustain in terms of debt sustainability, also in terms of our own limited fiscal space, it becomes very difficult to enhance climate action. So it is basically a situation that without finance, to expect developing countries to actually do climate action becomes an issue. So at present, the discussions are on, and the presidency is discussing these issues. One in the overall discussion today was about the Paris Agreement. The multilateral process is going to celebrate the 10th anniversary, and some of the aspects that need to be acknowledged as part of the 10th anniversary, and then the need for responding to the urgent requirements, the second part being the Paris architecture and the policy cycle, and then the third being the need to respond to the urgent action. And as initially, so there were discussions yesterday and now today. So only one leg has been taken up for discussions, and that was on the celebrations with respect to the Paris Agreement. Yes, it is indeed 10 years of the Paris Agreement. There are wins and there are challenges that countries face. Yes, we know that finance has perhaps, it helped, finance flows did start happening, but finance flows to developing countries have been very limited. So the scale of finance and even the terms at which it comes is actually not the kind that can actually, we can congratulate ourselves for. We need to do much more, and there is to be a recognition of the fact that we have a carbon budget. We know that there is a certain amount that can only be absorbed by the atmosphere, beyond which temperatures will rise beyond our levels and will impact the world at large. So if there is a carbon budget, and much of the carbon budget has been utilized or used by the developed countries, a carbon atom stays in the atmosphere for almost several centuries, even up to 5 or 6 centuries. So it is basically the past emissions that are responsible for the position that we are in. So unlike other pollutants which go away, carbon is not seen, but it stays in the atmosphere for a long, long time. So then it becomes, it is the onus of the developed countries that have emitted in the past and continue to emit now because of their industrial development, And they need to take responsibility of that, because now the carbon space is so little that if that becomes a something that we need to take, the burden of restricting ourselves to low emissions, then it has serious implications on developing countries, because tried and tested technologies would then not be available to them. They would have to come up with new technologies, innovative technologies, which take a lot of time to stabilize. So in the bargain, development would be at risk. And that is a challenge that we all face. And that was the basis for this whole dialogue and the need for having that 9.1 being discussed in a more honest and a threadbare manner. What has the like-minded countries wanted? They wanted a work program which allows us to discuss this issue of 9.1 in a more structured manner, and through the discussions arrive at an action plan on how to address it. What are the ways in which we can address financing challenges that we face, and whether 9.1 is helpful in addressing any of those. It is to be, and in our submissions we had identified that it has linkages with various other provisions of the Paris Agreement and the Convention, because remember, Article 9.1 says that it is an obligation of the developed countries in continuation of their obligations under the Convention. So the Convention mandates developed countries to finance climate action of developing countries to the extent that even incremental action has to be borne, the cost of that has to be borne by the developed countries. And that's Article 4.7 of the Convention. Following from there, 9.1 says that you need to provide finance to enable climate action. So effectively, this is a big onus. Both agreements is a mandatory commitment under both the Convention as well as the Paris Agreement. And the least that one expects is that this needs to be followed through, especially in the context of, the urgency that we all are now expressing about climate action. And the challenges and the timelines, as we say, that if we don't meet, then we cross 1.5 degrees. Those are the kind of framings that we are listening to, and it has to be in the context of finance, because one must understand, no country and which is already committed under the climate agreements would want to be not taking climate action. So one has to trust the fact that developing countries are ready to take climate action, and that's reflected in their NDCs. But the implementation is dependent on finance. Without finance, no implementation can happen. It is dependent on technology access, on capacity. And this is a fair ask that the developing countries are putting here, because otherwise the question is about just taking action, but from where? And so that's the discussion that's ongoing at the moment. And I think I can stop here, and maybe if there are any questions or any clarifications, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you so much, Chandni. Are there any questions that people want to raise? Please identify yourself and ask the question. We will take a few questions and then get Chandni to respond.
Hi, Josh Gabatis. I'm with Carbon Brief. As Meena said, you expressed extreme dissatisfaction with the NCQG outcome last year. You've talked a lot about 9.1, but how is India pushing for more ambition, given that there are no negotiations that directly address that NCQG target that you were so unhappy about? Is there any way in which you can push for raising finance into the trillions, or improve upon the 300 billion in some other way? Thank you.
Yes, please ask your question. Yeah.
Hello, this is Prayas from the Group Vikas Institute. I just wanted to ask, as you mentioned about the historical emissions and responsibility of countries because of which we are dealing the current situations of climate crisis, and with this slow process of UNFCCC going on in these 3 decades, we haven't seen that kind of intent actions from other parties also. So we will be late calling out only for the historical responsibility sooner in the time. So what does India thinks about it? So calling out for the historical responsibilities. So it's our also responsibility to take actions sooner to address all the climate catastrophes happening. So will only be calling out for the historical responsibility will be enough, or we have any other? We are strong in this. That's why this is the update of 3 decades of fights, and we will make the historical emitters responsible sooner. So what is the take of India and I think yes.
Maybe you take those 2 questions, Chandni.
Kevin, as I understood it, your question is about what is India doing in terms of its own ambition, right?
I suppose it's more that you basically said last year that this is unacceptable. The NCQG as it was finished. Do you feel that India has been sort of forced to accept that deal, or are there any avenues within these negotiations where India can push for the kind of ambition that's needed? Trillions of dollars. We had the Baku to Belém roadmap, but it's sort of unclear where that's going to go next. I'd be interested to know how India can or could push for something more in line with what you had in mind.
Okay, so how India could, so it's about the Baku, the 300 billion and what India could have done more, is it?
Let me summarize the question. I think what he's getting to is that we were not even unhappy with the NCQG, so therefore what more can be done to actually, what are you planning to do to get more? Is that
Yeah, essentially, yes. More concise.
Yeah. So, yes, we didn't, so the NCQG, of course, what happened. The finance, as you know, from there, 300 billion. If you look at paragraph 8 of the NCQG decision, it says that the developed countries shall take lead in setting a goal. It's not a commitment. It is a setting a goal. The whole commitment is about setting a goal, not meeting the commitments. And it is not in that sense in a language that was similar to what was existing in the Paris decision. The Paris decision says that the developed countries shall take the lead in providing 100 billion or in mobilizing 100 billion. That's not how the wording is. But it was in continuation of that paragraph 53. So that sets the boundaries, which was 9.3. So the whole conversation of 300 billion is in the context of 9.3. And that made us think about what about 9.1? So the discussions, and I would want to bring out the discussions that were going on last year. The initial request from the developing countries was for 1.3 trillion per year, with a 500 billion US dollars of 9.1 per year. Provision of 9.1 or under 9.1. The logic was that finance is, you can scale finance by 3 times easy. If you have a certain amount of resources at grant or concessional rates, you can scale finance. Now, how does that work? It's like this, that if you have a project which is costing you, let's say, an 8%. It's available for at an 8% cost, meaning the finance is available at 8% per annum. Let's say it's an amount of $100. Now, a developed country says, well, I will take care of, let's say, $20. I would provide you as either a grant, let's say if it's a grant, at $20. So what happens then? The cost of the project is 8% on 80 rupees now, and not on the 100 rupees. So your cost of capital actually reduces. The overall cost for the overall project declines. When the cost of the project declines, there's more money that can come in because your project becomes viable. If it was not viable earlier, because of the reduction in cost, it becomes viable. That's why our framing had been that we need 9.1, and 9.1 is the catalyst that can enable us to mobilize finance of the kind that we need for climate action. And we had, on the basis of needs determination reports, indicated we needed 1.3 trillion per year. So when we did not, the discussion that happened, finally there was only an agreement on 300 billion. That this conversation we wanted to bring in again into the UNFCCC, the Paris Agreement process, that that 300 billion doesn't take care of our needs. It's to come in 2035. It's not even now, it's 10 years later. So by the time 300 billion comes in 2035, it will be less valuable than 300 billion now. It's going to be just about 200 billion if you take a present value of the three. If you do that, it might just be 200 billion or less, depending upon how the inflationary pressures are on. So effectively, how do you mobilize? And therefore, we wanted to bring back that whole discussion in the context of 9.1. And that's why the proposal from the like-minded developing countries was that we need a work program, because there was clearly, we understood that the developed countries didn't want to discuss 9.1 at all, because that puts the onus on them. 9.3 is about mobilizing through various sources, private, public, bilateral, multilateral. It's a framing that kind of defrays the responsibility across several actors. So we wanted to bring that conversation back, also to understand each other's points a little better, and also to indicate that how important 9.1 was, and to be able to enhance our flows to almost 1.3 trillion that we needed. Now, coming to this Baku to Belém point that you raised, the Baku to Belém proposal is, you have to read para 7 of the decision, which says, call on all actors to kind of get to 1.3 trillion of finance flows. It seems like a vision that we all need to come together. It's like a big leader saying we need to do this to arrive at 1.3. How? Because nobody is being mandated to do anything. So why should actors come together to just do 1.3? It's like a call for action. The paragraph 27 then goes on to say that the developed countries will, it goes on to say that the two presidencies, which is Azerbaijan and Brazil, which was then the incoming presidency for the next year, would come together and prepare a report on a Baku to Belém roadmap to 1.3. So because 7 was, para 7 had no operative, no verb to get it to going, they needed to create that verb. And so they created that verb through this Baku to Belém roadmap, that now the Baku to Belém roadmap would be available, and that would be the basis for mobilizing 1.3. And at that time, the agreement was that, look, we do not want to negotiate this document. Developing countries included said that we don't want to negotiate this document because if it's a report by two countries, then negotiating it becomes extremely difficult. So it was left as a report. So it's a standing document. It's like a reference document. If a country wants to look at it for enabling, mobilizing, or seeking climate action, it can climate finance. It could look at some of the measures that it has. This report has indicated, and it's not mandatory. It is to be taken as much as you want, whatever you can, depending upon the country's circumstances. And it has a whole host of suggestions, but not all may be relevant to countries. So this is about the 1.3 trillion. And this is, as far as the multilateral process, this is how much we can go, actually, Kevin. That there are limitations in the multilateral process. So if it was 300 billion that made us come to this discussion of let's try to understand what do countries think about 9.1. Without 9.1, how are we even to get 300 billion actually? Even that is a big question. So that is the response. I think your question was on historical emissions, the slow process in that, and calling out that historical responsibility, and whether that is enough for us. Is that what you went? Okay. So explain how there are these historical emissions, right? So emissions some 300 years ago are also up in the atmosphere. And at that time, most developing countries had perhaps no emissions at all because they were not really at that stage, the industrial development had not happened in them. Secondly, most of these countries were also subjugated, right? They were principalities or part of under the colonial rule. So the industrial policies that were adopted in such countries were in the nature of being exploitative, taking out, let's say, minerals, or creating plants that would feed markets elsewhere, creating through that process emissions as well. So in the past 3 decades since the Rio Convention, there has been there is of course no recognition. So the Paris Agreement, the Convention recognizes the historical responsibility. But increasingly countries don't want to talk about historical responsibilities. They say things have changed, countries have developed, other countries are doing much better, they should take responsibility as well. So that is the conflict that exists on historical responsibilities. It is being called out again and again by developing countries at various fora, the fact that there is a historical responsibility and you need to take action. Is that enough? No. Yeah, I'll stop here, I think. Yeah.
Let's give Chandni a big hand and thank you for being with us. You don't have to stay because I know all of you are so busy with your negotiations. And it's my pleasure to welcome Vice Yu, Vincente Yu. He's also so busy and he's coordinating the G77 on the global stocktake and also on the GST, the loss and damage discussion. He's very busy, but he's here with us. So Vice, tell us, how did the 1 week go?
How did the 1 week go? Thank you. Thank you, Chandni. Thank you. And good evening, colleagues. I'm sorry, I was in and out of the room. I was trying to sort some things out. So I have the pleasure of coordinating the G77 on both GST and loss and damage. GST, okay, do you guys know the global stocktake? Is this 5-yearly process that we, okay. So I've been dealing with the GST even before there was a GST. I helped negotiate Article 4, the provision in the Paris Agreement that launches it, and then how it's supposed to run and all that. And so negotiating the GST agenda items here we're in Bonn, right? Belém. We're in Belém. Feels like Groundhog Day. I don't know if you've watched the movie Groundhog Day. No? Okay, that was back in the 1980s. Sorry. Anyway, it feels like it's watching a movie on repeat, right? Because the things that we heard government saying to each other in the whole this week sounded like the things they said to each other in Bonn in June, which sounded like the things that they said to each other in Baku in November last year, which sounded like the things they said to each other in Bonn in June last year, which so essentially so it's like a repeat. And I don't think we have advanced anything anywhere much on the agenda items that we covered, which is also largely the reason why it's been difficult to say anything as G77 in these areas. So it's been countries negotiating. Now the big issues there on the GST, for example, we call this the UAE dialogue, was exactly what to do with it, because there was this idea, right, that was born in Dubai of a dialogue. We had no idea what it would contain. We had no idea what it would be about. We had no idea how to go about it, and that was what we were trying to fight over. And so some of those of us who are in some developing countries will say, because it's about finance, because it's the finance section, we should talk about how we track the money that you pledged. Others were saying no speakers, right? So that's just things. So it's a big fight. I don't know if there's any resolution here, and I don't know where it will end. Now on loss and damage, the key thing that we're trying to do here is to land a decision that we should have taken in Baku. We were not able to finish it in Baku for many reasons. We thought we could finish it in Bonn. We did not, and now we're trying to finish it here. I think we will be able to finish it here, but not this week. Most likely next week. That depends on what the presidency tells us. And the big fights there are several things. One is on finance. So developing countries are saying, we want to see some language that talks about coming up with more money for loss and damage and in the fund and technical assistance. But developed countries are saying no to that. They said, well, we put in money. Let's see how it works first. Now, of course, we're arguing back against it. And then there were several other things that we're trying to push. I think some of the reasons, some of the things that we're asking for on loss and damage, we will get if we get a conclusion to this. But most likely it will do it next week. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Wise. We've got 10 minutes left. Any burning questions and thank you for remaining. I know it's very late. Now, usually the Third World Network will get a side event on the first day of the COP. Now, this time it's an evening slot, and you can see, usually we'll have a full house, but this time late hour. But anyway, I'm so happy that you all came, and this are really the people who want to know more. Now, do you have any questions? Any of you? It's good to see you all here. Yes, don't be shy. You don't? Okay, great. Now, yes.
Just a quick query on loss and damage. So where do you think this will go in the next week? Will it be somewhere, any text related to the ambitions on finances, or will it be suspended to the next board meeting or maybe SPs?
You mean on loss and damage
loss and damage
finance?
fund, yes.
Under the loss and damage fund. That's a good question. My feeling is that they're also stuck. Again, because it is really a fight over do you developed countries agree to put more money into the fund, and the developed countries will come in and say, well, we don't really agree to put more money into the fund because we have put some money in it, and we want to see whether it actually works, right? So I don't know exactly what the decision on the loss and damage fund will look like, and what kind of guidance they will give to that. But I would be surprised if there is an actual call for money. I don't know. That depends on my colleagues working in the finance room. What I know is that in my room, the developed countries are resisting it. I would imagine that they're also resisting it there.
Well, I have the luxury of walking around while you are coordinating. There is no movement on finance anywhere. They don't want to talk about it. And they're saying that, we already have the new collective quantified goal on finance. We have something there. So they don't want to talk anything anywhere on finance. And this is the fight also in relation to the global goal on adaptation. We could not get one of our speakers on the global goal on adaptation because they're really in intense negotiations right now. The big fight on the global goal on adaptation basically is for the developing countries are asking for indicators on how you are going to measure the means of implementation. Because the whole idea of the global goal is that when we come to the next global stocktake, we need to know how the world is progressing in relation to the adaptation. And a key part of that is how the finance has been happening. Now, the developed countries do not want to talk about that. What they're saying is you should talk about indicators related to overseas development assistance, indicators related to your national budget. So they don't want to talk about their responsibility and their provision, or they want to dilute it and talk about the national responsibility. So we are stuck everywhere. Vice, you can go if you need to go. Yeah. They were stuck everywhere on finance issues. Now, for those of you who are still here and you are young and you're feeling very disillusioned, don't be disillusioned. Now, there's a lot of money out there, but it's not going to where it needs to go. And we know there is money for bombs, there are money for wars, there's money for other things, but there is no money for saving the planet and the poor. Now, the only way we can save this process is for building the power and the voices of civil society everywhere. Particularly, there's a strong global alliance, and Third World Network is part of an alliance called the Global Campaign to Demand Climate Justice. And so this is about also northern groups who are with us. So we really need to raise our voices and hold governments to account. So don't feel disillusioned. We have to keep fighting. This is the only rules that we have here. If, like Donald Trump walked out of it, and not only did he walk out of it, he said that this is a hoax. So he's going around the world, drill, baby, drill. So we are saying if he goes drill, baby, drill, we are drown, baby, drown. Because that's the real thing that's happening, all these emissions. So you sit in the room, and for me, it's really like you're living in another planet. Because in the real world, what you see happening is that the climate agenda has come down, particularly in the global north. You see, because of what Trump has done, and also in my own country, Malaysia, and this is where Third World Network is from, if you heard about the tariff fights and so on, Donald Trump has gone around the world using the tariffs as a weapon and forcing countries to import coal and gas from the United States. So here we are parties to the Paris Agreement. We are supposed to transition away from fossil fuels. There you have Donald Trump walk out of the Paris Agreement And not only is the US not doing what it needs to do and need to do much more because of its historical responsibility, it's making us difficult to do what we have to do. So not only is there no an effort to reduce ambition everywhere, it's also taking us backwards. And more importantly, now the issue of historical responsibility and why there is a provision called Article 9.1 of the Paris Agreement. It's not because they all were, they all loved us and therefore they decided that they can agree to this. The real reason was because of historical emissions. So that is why there is a climate debt. And this is why we call it as a climate debt. You've heard of a lot of kinds of debts, but this is a climate debt that the global north owes the developing world, and that is why they are responsible for the provision of finance. So this is not charity, this is not overseas development assistance, we are not beggars, we don't come here because we like to ask for money, it's because they owe us the money. And the one thing about the CBAM, because I still have a little bit more time, the one thing about the CBAM is, for the Carbon Border Measure Adjustment, now do read Third World Network update number 8, is it? Is it number 8 on unilateral measures? Yeah, Hilary Kung is the author of that update, where it very clearly shows that the CBAM actually will have a reverse flow of funds, of money coming from developing countries because they are taxing developing countries. So instead of money coming from the global north to the global south, there is a reverse flow of money from the global south to the global north. Now this is really not climate justice, it's climate injustice, and it's absolutely a problem. So what we need to do here in this process is to learn a lot more. So for those of you who want to know more, please visit the Third World Network website, understand what they are. If you want to be in touch with us, there's a lot of analysis. We have been to many COPs and we don't have fun outside. We don't go for parties and we can't go and take part in marches tomorrow because we have to be inside here watching what governments are doing and telling the story. As President Lula said, this is supposed to be the COP of truth, and we need to tell the truth about who is really responsible for what's not happening. So it's no point just talking about more ambition when the developing countries who are here in this process are committed. So the way I phrase it is this cooperation or is this competition? And is this fighting, combat? So if you're really committed to multilateralism, you need to do it together, but you have to stick to your obligations. So don't keep pushing and pushing developing countries to do more when the global north has not done what it is supposed to do. So thank you very much for coming to this event, and I hope you keep following us. How do you say good night in Portuguese? Good. Are you all from Brazil? Wonderful. Good night.